Sienna adjusted her laptop screen, her fingers moving swiftly over the trackpad as she finalized a logo design for a client. It had been a long day and she was looking forward to a quiet evening with takeout and a good book. But just as she reached for her phone to place an order, it rang. Her mother's name, Valerie, flashed across the screen. Sienna exhaled, already bracing herself. She loved her mother, but their conversations always seemed to revolve around one thing: what Sienna could do for the family. She picked up with a measured tone. "Sienna, don't forget, you need to be here by 3 on Saturday to help set up," Valerie said briskly, skipping any greeting. "Jake's dinner needs to be perfect." Sienna frowned. Jake's dinner? There was a pause before she finally asked, "Wait, what dinner?" Her mother let out a short sigh, as if this should have been obvious. "His promotion dinner. We talked about this last week. It's a huge deal. All his colleagues from the firm will be there." Sienna's stomach sank. No, she hadn't heard about this. Of course, Jake, her older brother, and the family's golden child, was being celebrated again. And of course, she hadn't been invited, just expected to set the stage. "But I wasn't invited," Sienna said, keeping her voice neutral, though the sting was already settling in. "Well, sweetheart, it's mostly Jake's colleagues and some of our friends," Valerie explained, her tone light and dismissive. "It's not really your crowd, but we need you there to make sure everything looks nice. You have such a great eye for design, and the place needs a little touch up before everyone arrives." There it was again, the familiar feeling of being useful but never important. Not worthy enough to sit at the table, but essential to making sure everything looked flawless. "I don't know if I can make it," Sienna said, trying to sound indifferent. Valerie barely let her finish. "Oh, come on, Sienna. It won't take long. Just set up the centerpieces, make sure the table settings are perfect, maybe help get the appetizers ready. You don't even have to stay." Sienna clenched her jaw. She should be used to this by now. This was her role, the one they always relied on, the one who fixed things behind the scenes, but never the one who mattered enough to be included. "You'll be there, right?" her mother pressed. Sienna closed her eyes for a beat, forcing herself to keep her voice steady. "Yeah, sure. I- I'll figure it out." "Perfect. I knew I could count on you," Valerie said cheerfully, already moving on. "Oh, and pick up extra cloth napkins on your way. We might run out." The call ended before Sienna could even say goodbye. She set the phone down, staring at the empty takeout menu in front of her. The weight of years of being overlooked settled in. But this time, something felt different. She wasn't sure if she wanted to play this role anymore. Sienna stared at her phone long after the call had ended, the words looping in her mind like a broken record. "You don't even have to stay." Of course, she didn't. She never did. She was never meant to be part of the celebration, only the silent force behind it. A reliable extra, not a guest. Never a guest. Her fingers curled around the phone, frustration bubbling up, but she knew better than to argue. It wouldn't change anything it never had. With a deep sigh, she pushed herself off the couch and paced her small but beautifully decorated loft, the very space she had carved out for herself, away from the constant demands of her family. A soft chime interrupted her thoughts. A notification from a wellness retreat app she had downloaded months ago, but never used. "Last-minute weekend getaway. Limited spots available." Sienna's eyes flicked to the message, curiosity piqued. She tapped it open. A luxurious countryside retreat only an hour away. Spa treatments, yoga, gourmet dining, complete digital detox. She hesitated for only a moment before swiping through the available dates. Check in, Friday afternoon. Check out, Sunday evening, right in the middle of the dinner party chaos. Her heart pounded as she hovered over the Reserve Now button. She had never done anything like this, never just removed herself from a situation where she was needed. But for once, she wanted to know what it felt like to be somewhere because she chose to be. Before she could overthink it, she tapped the screen. Reservation confirmed. A slow, nervous thrill ran through her. Did I really just do that? The weight of guilt threatened to creep in, but then she thought about Every single time she had dropped everything for them, for Jake, for her mother, for people who never even noticed. The way she was expected to step in without question, but never acknowledged beyond a quick thanks before they moved on. No, not this time. Her phone buzzed again, this time a message from Tasha, her best friend and lifelong cheerleader. Tasha, hey, drinks Friday night. Haven't seen you in ages. Sienna smirked, already typing back. Sienna, going on a solo getaway. The response was instant. Tasha, excuse me, who are you and what have you done with my friend? Sienna chuckled, the tension in her chest loosening just a little. Sienna, let's just say I'm learning to set boundaries. Tasha, about damn time. For the first time in years, Sienna felt something shift inside her, a decision made for herself and no one else. She turned off her phone, stretched out on the couch, and let herself breathe. This time, they would figure it out without her. By Friday afternoon, Sienna had her bags packed and was already on the road, heading toward the countryside retreat. The city skyline faded behind her as rolling hills and lush greenery stretched ahead, offering a serenity she hadn't felt in years. She resisted the urge to check her phone, knowing exactly what she'd find: texts from her mother with reminders and last-minute instructions. But she had made her choice. For the first time in her life, she had put herself first, and the world wouldn't collapse because of it. Or at least, that's what she told herself. At exactly 3:15 p.m., her phone buzzed against the passenger seat. Then again, and again. She exhaled, gripping the steering wheel as she fought the impulse to reach for it. When the chime of a voicemail followed, curiosity got the best of her. At a red light, she tapped the notification. Her mother's voice spilled into the car, tense and clipped. Sienna, where are you? It's past 3 and we need to start setting up. The caterer just called. There's an issue with the table arrangements and Olivia is freaking out. I told them you'd be here soon, so call me back. You can't just disappear like this. Sienna scoffed, shaking her head. Can't I? She turned the volume down, letting the rest of the voicemail go unheard. If they needed to figure things out without her, then so be it. Back at her parents' house, chaos was brewing. Valerie paced the dining room, her phone clutched in her hand as she checked the time again. This isn't like her, she muttered under her breath. Sienna is always on time. Maybe she got caught up with work, her husband, Robert, offered, though even he sounded unconvinced. Jake, meanwhile, leaned against the kitchen counter, utterly unbothered. Or maybe she finally decided she had better things to do, he remarked, sipping from a glass of whiskey. Olivia shot him a glare. Jake, this is a disaster. The table isn't set, the candles aren't placed, and I don't know what to do with the seating chart. Your boss's wife is allergic to shellfish. What if they put her next to the shrimp platter? This is a nightmare. Robert sighed, rubbing his temple. All right, all right. We'll just have to do it ourselves. Valerie's jaw tightened. But Sienna always... She stopped herself mid-sentence, the realization settling in. Sienna always fixed everything. Not this time. Meanwhile, as her family scrambled to pull the dinner together, Sienna checked into the retreat, stepping into a world completely separate from the chaos she had left behind. A friendly receptionist greeted her with a warm smile and a soft-spoken welcome. We encourage all our guests to disconnect for the weekend, the receptionist said, handing her a key card. Many people turn off their phones entirely. Sienna hesitated, then, in a moment of boldness, she powered down her phone and slipped it into her bag. Let them figure it out. By the time she stepped into her private suite, overlooking a tranquil lake, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Peace. Back at her parents' house, the atmosphere had shifted from mild frustration to full-blown panic. It was now 4:30 p.m., and guests would be arriving within the hour. Sienna was nowhere to be found. Valerie paced the kitchen, phone in hand, sending another unanswered text message. She's not responding. She always responds. Her voice was edged with anxiety and irritation, but beneath it, there was something else. A flicker of realization. Robert, usually indifferent about the details of these events, finally put his drink down and frowned. Maybe she's busy, he said carefully. Valerie whipped around, eyes flashing. Busy? Busy with what? This is her family, Robert. She knew how important this was. Jake let out a careless chuckle, adjusting his tie in the hallway mirror. I mean, it's not like she actually does anything important here. She just fusses over details. At that, Olivia snapped, throwing her hands in the air. Are you kidding me, Jake? Have you even looked at this place? She gestured toward the dining area, which was still half set, a mess of mismatched silverware and crooked centerpieces. We have 30 guests coming. Your mom is freaking out and nothing is ready. And do you know why? Because your sister was always the one who took care of everything. Jake rolled his eyes, but for once, he didn't have a comeback. Valerie took a shaky breath, stepping into the dining room and staring at the mess. The pristine vision she had in her head, the perfectly arranged floral centerpieces, the elegantly folded napkins, the effortlessly flowing evening, was falling apart before her eyes. For years, Sienna had been the glue holding everything together, the one who made sure the glasses sparkled, the appetizers were plated beautifully, the lighting was just right. She had done it so seamlessly that no one had ever thought about how much work it actually was. Until now. All right, Robert said, finally rolling up his sleeves. We need to stop waiting for Sienna to show up. Let's figure this out. Valerie hesitated. Did she even know how? The next 30 minutes were a frantic blur. Robert attempted to set the table, but half the forks were missing and none of the napkins matched. Olivia struggled with the flower arrangements, muttering under her breath that they looked wrong. Meanwhile, Valerie nearly burned the appetizers because she got distracted rearranging the seating chart for the third time. By the time the first guests arrived at 6 p.m., the house was not ready. Valerie plastered on a tight, forced smile as she opened the door, but the moment guests stepped inside, the disaster was impossible to hide. The table looked hastily thrown together, candles were unlit, and the food was still in the oven instead of beautifully plated on the serving trays. Jake's boss, a polished and intimidating man in a sleek gray suit, glanced around and raised an eyebrow. I thought you said your family throws great events, he muttered to Jake, not bothering to lower his voice. Jake flushed but said nothing. One of his colleagues, a woman in an elegant cocktail dress, surveyed the setup and whispered to another guest, "This feels a little thrown together, doesn't it?" Valerie, hearing every word, felt her cheeks burn. Where was Sienna when she needed her? And then it hit her. She had expected Sienna to be there, hadn't even considered the possibility that she might not show up, because Sienna had always been dependable, always put family first. But this time, she hadn't. For the first time in years, Valerie realized just how much they had taken her for granted. Meanwhile, miles away at the retreat, Sienna was lying on a sun-drenched lounge chair, sipping a glass of fresh fruit-infused water, completely unaware of the disaster unfolding back home. And even if she had known, she wouldn't have cared. As the sun dipped lower over the rolling hills, Sienna stretched out on a cushioned lounge chair, a gentle breeze rustling through the trees. The weight on her shoulders, the invisible burden she had carried for years, felt lighter than ever. A soft hum of conversation filled the retreat's outdoor patio, but for the first time in her life, she wasn't part of the background, fixing things for others. She was simply existing with no expectations placed upon her. A waitress approached, setting down a delicately arranged fruit platter and a steaming cup of herbal tea. "Let me know if you need anything else," she said with a warm smile, before disappearing into the background. Sienna exhaled, allowing herself to fully relax. No buzzing phone, no last-minute text from her mother demanding table settings to be rearranged, no frantic voices asking, "Sienna, can you fix this?" For once, no one needed her. And it felt incredible. She picked up her tea, letting the warmth seep through her fingers as she gazed out at the horizon. In the distance, a few other guests strolled along the scenic trails, moving at their own pace. No rush, no pressure, just freedom. Across from her, an older woman with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes sat sipping her own tea. Her name was Margot, and she had struck up a conversation with Sienna earlier during a yoga session. She had an air of wisdom about her, the kind that only came from years of learning hard lessons. Margot studied her for a moment before speaking. "You look lighter than when you arrived." Sienna gave a small smile. "That obvious?" Margot chuckled. "I've seen that look before. It's the face of someone who just realized they don't have to be everything to everyone." Sienna stared down at her tea, the words hitting deeper than she expected. She thought about all the years she had spent silently serving her family, making sure everything was perfect while never being seen, never being valued beyond what she could do for them. For the first time, she voiced something she had never dared to say out loud. "I think I spent my whole life trying to earn my family's approval, making myself useful so I'd feel necessary." Margot nodded knowingly. "And now?" Sienna let out a slow breath, setting her tea down. "Now, I think I'm done with that." The realization settled deep in her bones, a quiet but undeniable truth. She had spent years chasing validation from people who never once considered how much they relied on her. And now that she had stepped away, she could finally see it clearly. Margaret smiled. "That's the first step. Now, the hard part is making sure you don't let them pull you back in." Sienna nodded, her resolve hardening. She wasn't going back to the way things were. Her phone sat silent and powered off in her bag, completely forgotten. For the first time in her life, she wasn't waiting for an apology, an invitation, or even a thank you. She was waiting for nothing, and it felt like peace. By Sunday evening, Sienna was back in her apartment, feeling lighter than she had in years. The retreat had been exactly what she needed, a break from the exhausting cycle of doing everything for everyone else. But as soon as she powered her phone back on, the notifications flooded in. Missed calls, texts from her mother, one from her father. Even Olivia had messaged her. She scrolled through the frantic texts from Saturday night. "Mom, Sienna, where are you? We need you." "Mom, guests are arriving soon. This is a mess." "Mom, I can't believe you would just disappear like this. It's so selfish." Sienna sighed, unimpressed. She didn't regret missing the dinner, but she wasn't looking forward to the inevitable conversation that would come next. Just as she put her phone down, it buzzed again. Her dad, Robert, calling. Unlike her mother, he never called unless something was really important. Against her better judgment, she answered. "Hey, Dad," she said cautiously. A heavy sigh came through the line. "Sienna, I just wanted to say, I'm sorry." That stopped her. She had expected anger, maybe even accusations, but not an apology. "I know your mom has probably sent a dozen messages by now," Robert continued. "She's upset, but honestly, I think we all needed a wake-up call. Last night, it was a disaster." Sienna smirked. "Yeah? How bad?" Robert chuckled dryly. "Let's just say your mother nearly had a meltdown when she realized the table settings were a mess and the candles weren't even lit. Olivia was stressed, Jake was useless, and I was trying to figure out how to plate appetizers without making them look like a toddler had thrown them together." Sienna shook her head, half amused, half exasperated. "Sounds like quite the evening." There was a pause before her father spoke again, his voice quieter, more serious. "Sienna, we've been leaning on you for far too long, expecting you to handle everything without even realizing how unfair that was. Last night, we finally saw how much we rely on you. And we shouldn't have assumed you'd always be there to clean up after us." Sienna swallowed hard, her grip tightening on the phone. She had waited years to hear someone in her family acknowledge that. "Thanks, Dad," she said softly. "Your mother wants to talk to you," Robert added. "She won't say it outright, but I think she knows she messed up." Sienna exhaled. "I'll call her, but I'm not going back to the way things were." "I don't expect you to," he admitted. "And honestly, I don't think you should." For the first time in a long while, Sienna felt like she was finally being seen. Hanging up, she stared at the screen for a long moment before dialing her mother's number. It was time for a long, overdue conversation, but this time on her terms. Sienna sat across from her mother at a quiet cafe, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee as she studied the woman who had for years dictated her place in the family. Valerie looked tense, stirring her tea absent-mindedly, as if trying to find the right words. I suppose your father told you what a disaster Saturday night was, Valerie finally said, her voice carefully measured. Sienna took a slow sip of coffee before answering. He did, but honestly, that's not what I want to talk about. Valerie's brows lifted in mild surprise. Oh. Sienna leaned forward slightly, her voice calm but firm. Mom, this isn't just about one night. It's about every single time you've expected me to drop everything and help while never including me. Valerie exhaled, setting her spoon down with a small clink. Sienna, that's not fair. We count on you because you're so good at these things. Sienna's jaw clenched. There it was again, the same reasoning that had excused years of being treated like an unpaid event coordinator rather than a family member. You count on me, she said slowly, but you don't value me. You never invite me as a guest. You never ask if I even want to help. You just assume I will because I always have. Valerie shifted uncomfortably. I never meant to make you feel that way. But you did, Sienna pressed, and it's going to stop. Valerie blinked, clearly thrown off by the finality in her daughter's voice. I'm not saying I won't be there for family when it matters, Sienna continued. But from now on, I'm going to have boundaries. That means you don't get to decide for me. If I help, it'll be because I choose to, not because it's expected. A long silence stretched between them. For a moment, Sienna thought her mother might argue, might push back, like she always did. But then, Valerie sighed. You're right. Sienna froze, her heart skipping a beat. Had she actually heard that correctly? We have taken you for granted, Valerie admitted, glancing down at her hands. I didn't realize just how much until you weren't there the other night. She exhaled slowly before meeting Sienna's gaze. I don't want to lose you over this. So, if you need space, I'll respect that. The words weren't perfect, but they were real. Sienna nodded, a strange mix of relief and newfound confidence settling in her chest. I don't need space, Mom. I just need to be treated like I matter. For the first time in years, she felt heard. As they left the cafe, Valerie hesitated before saying, We're planning a family gathering next month. No pressure, but we'd love to have you there. Sienna smiled. As a guest? Valerie chuckled softly. Yes, as a guest. It wasn't a grand resolution. It wouldn't erase years of being overlooked, but it was a start. And for Sienna, that was enough. A month later, Sienna stepped into her parents' house, but this time, everything felt different. The dining table was already set, the appetizers arranged, and the air filled with the scent of slow-roasted herbs. But most importantly, she hadn't lifted a single finger to make it happen. Hey, you made it, her father Robert greeted her warmly, handing her a glass of wine as soon as she walked in. Her mother Valerie gave a small but genuine smile. We handled everything, she said, almost as if proving a point. Tonight, you're just here to enjoy. Sienna raised an eyebrow. Was this really happening? She glanced toward her brother Jake, who, predictably, was still lounging on the couch, but for once, his chaos wasn't her responsibility. Olivia had taken charge of organizing, and even though the napkins weren't perfectly folded and the candles were slightly uneven, Sienna didn't care. As she took a seat at the table, not as a helper, but as a guest, she felt something shift within her. The version of herself that had once dropped everything for these gatherings, that had let herself be pulled into the endless cycle of being needed but never appreciated, was gone. In its place was someone new. Someone who knew how to say no. Someone who understood that her worth wasn't measured by how useful she was to others. Her phone buzzed in her pocket and she pulled it out, smiling as she read the notification. a flight confirmation for Greece next month. She had finally booked the solo trip she had been dreaming of, a trip where she wasn't an afterthought, where she didn't have to play a role, where she could just be. Tasha had texted too, ready for our girls' night tomorrow, no backing out, queen of boundaries. Sienna chuckled, typing back, wouldn't miss it. Across the table, her father raised his glass for a toast. To family, he said. Then, with a meaningful look at Sienna, he added, and to those who finally put themselves first. As the glasses clinked together, Sienna smiled. Not just because things had changed, but because she had changed, and she wasn't going back. The story of Sienna is a powerful reminder that self-worth is not defined by how much we do for others, but by how much we value ourselves. For years, Sienna lived in a cycle of being needed but never truly appreciated. She was expected to serve without question, and when she finally chose to prioritize herself, her absence forced her family to see how much they had taken her for granted. The biggest lesson here is about setting boundaries. Sienna's journey shows that it's not selfish to say no, it's necessary. People will continue to rely on you as long as you let them, but it's up to you to decide where to draw the line. Another key takeaway is that change doesn't happen overnight, but small steps make a difference. When Sienna stopped catering to everyone else's needs, her family had no choice but to take responsibility. Though they didn't transform instantly, they started recognizing her as more than just the dependable extra. Ultimately, Sienna's story teaches us that choosing yourself is not abandonment, it's self-respect. And sometimes the only way for others to see your worth is to stop proving it